The silhouette of Grace O'Malley hunched over her infant daughter as the last embers of her campfire died, casting them into darkness under the vast Montana Territory sky of 1876. Her trembling fingers stroked the baby's wispy hair, desperation clawing at her heart as the autumn night grew colder around them. 2 days on the trail with nothing but a stolen horse, a bundle of meager possessions, and her precious 6-month-old Anna had brought her to the breaking point. The snap of a twig made her head jerk up, her hand instinctively reaching for the small knife tucked in her boot, the only protection she had against the wilderness and those who might be following her. "Madam," the voice was deep, cautious. "You all right there?" A tall figure emerged from the shadows, leading a dappled mare. In the dim starlight, she could make out the broad shoulders, the worn leather vest, and the unmistakable silhouette of a cowboy hat. His face remained shadowed, but she could feel his eyes taking in her situation, the cold ashes, the bundled infant, her obvious distress. "Don't come any closer," Grace warned, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. The man stopped, raising his hand slightly. "Name's Yates Forrester. Got a camp just over that rise with a good fire going. Not looking to cause any trouble, but—" His eyes fell to the sleeping baby. Her baby slept beside cold ashes. The cowboy said, "You'll sleep by my fire tonight." Grace clutched Anna tighter. "Why would you help us? You don't know me." Yates remained still, his voice steady. "My ma taught me never to leave folks, especially little ones, out in the cold when I've got warmth to share." He gestured toward the rise. "No strings attached. You can have your space, get warm, maybe some hot food if you're hungry. Then be on your way come morning if that's what you want." Grace hesitated, looking down at Anna's peaceful face. The baby wouldn't remain peaceful for long once the night chills settled deeper into her tiny bones. "I keep my rifle close," she warned, a slight nod from the cowboy. "Wouldn't expect anything less, madam." With stiff movements, Grace gathered Anna and her small bundle of possessions. She approached the man cautiously, keeping several feet between them. Up close, the moonlight revealed a weathered face, perhaps 30 years old, with clear eyes that held her gaze steadily. "My camp's this way," he said, turning to lead his horse. "It's just a short walk." Grace followed, every sense alert. The sound of crackling flames reached her before she saw the welcoming glow of the campfire. A simple set-up bedroll, saddle as a pillow, coffee pot at the edge of the flames, and a small pot of something that smelled wonderfully of beans and bacon. "Take a seat wherever you're comfortable," Yates said, moving to the opposite side of the fire. "Coffee's hot, and there's stew if you're hungry." Grace settled on a flat rock, cradling Anna close to her chest. The warmth from the fire immediately eased the chill that had settled into her bones. "When's the last time you ate, madam?" Yates asked, filling a tin cup with coffee. "Yesterday morning," Grace admitted reluctantly. "And the name's Grace O'Malley." He handed her the coffee without stepping too close. "Your little one have a name too?" "Anna." The word came out softer than she intended. Yates nodded, returning to his side of the fire. "Headed somewhere particular, Grace?" She sipped the coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest. "El Dorado. Supposed to be in Wyoming Territory. Heard there might be work there." "El Dorado." Yates nodded. "It's real enough. About 4 days' ride north of here, nestled in the foothills. Cattle country mostly, some mining operations." He stirred the pot of beans. "Mind if I ask what kind of work you're looking for?" Grace studied him over the rim of her cup, weighing how much to reveal. "Anything honest. I can cook, clean, so I've worked in boarding houses before." Yates dished up a plate of beans and held it out for her. "Happened to be headed that way myself, driving some cattle to market there." Grace took the plate but made no move to eat. "Why are you alone then?" "Cattle drives need men." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "My boys are camped about a mile west with the herd. I ride ahead sometimes to scout the trail, find good camping spots." He gestured to her plate. "It's not poisoned if that's what you're worried about." Grace balanced the plate on her knee and took a cautious bite. The flavors exploded in her mouth: salt, smoke, and richness that made her realize just how hungry she was. She ate several more bites before speaking again. "Why'd you really stop, Mr. Forrester?" "Most men would ride past a woman alone." Yates gazed into the fire. "Most men might. I'm not most men." He poked at the logs with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "Truth is, I saw your situation and couldn't just ride by. World's hard enough without leaving folks to freeze in the night." Anna stirred against Grace's chest, letting out a small whimper before settling again. Grace adjusted the blanket around her, aware of Yates watching. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. "How old?" "6 months next week." Grace stroked Anna's cheek with her finger. "She's been stronger than me through all this." "Babies often are," Yates replied. "They don't know enough to be afraid yet." Grace felt her guard slip just slightly. There was something about this man, a steadiness that reminded her of her father before the war had changed him. "You running from something, Grace?" The question was gentle, without judgment. She stiffened. "What makes you say that?" Woman alone with a baby, miles from anywhere, looking over her shoulder. Doesn't take much figuring. Grace considered lying, then decided against it. "Yes, but it's not what you might think. I haven't broken any laws, never thought you had." Yates poured himself more coffee. "But if someone's after you, might be good for me to know, especially if I'm offering to escort you to El Dorado." "You'd do that." The words slipped out before she could catch them. "Headed there anyway," he said with a shrug. "Safer traveling together than alone, for both of us." Grace stared at him, searching for deception in his face and finding none. "It's my husband's brother," she finally said. "My husband died in a mining accident 8 months back. His brother Silas decided I was part of his inheritance." Understanding darkened Yates' expression. "He after you or the baby too, both of us. He says Anna is rightfully his brother's child, so she belongs to the family." Grace's voice hardened. "He's never getting his hands on her." "No," Yates agreed, "he's not." He added another log to the fire. "We'll leave at first light. My men know to wait if I don't return by noon. We can join them, or travel parallel to the herd if you're more comfortable that way." Grace wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence, but the practicality of his offer was undeniable. "Why would you risk trouble for strangers?" Yates looked up at the stars for a long moment. "Because 12 years ago, I was riding fence in Colorado when I found a woman and her boy hiding in my line shack. Husband had beat her half to death. I helped them get to the next town over, gave them money for a stage ticket east." His eyes found hers across the flames. "Never knew what happened to them, but I sleep better knowing I did right by them." Grace nodded slowly. "We'll ride with you to El Dorado, but I'll pull my weight cooking whatever needs doing." "Fair enough." Yates stood, stretching his long frame. "You take my bedroll tonight, I'll keep watch for a while." "I couldn't." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "You've got the little one to think about. I've slept rough plenty of times." Grace wanted to argue, but exhaustion was seeping into her bones, making her eyelids heavy. "Thank you, Mr. Forrester." "Yates," he corrected. "Just Yates." "Thank you, Yates." She settled into his bedroll, tucking Anna securely beside her. The warmth of the fire and the unexpected safety of another person's protection allowed her muscles to relax for the first time in days. As sleep claimed her, she was vaguely aware of Yates sitting against his saddle, rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond their circle of light. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Grace opened her eyes to find Anna already awake, being entertained by Yates, who was making soft clicking sounds while cooking breakfast one-handed. The baby's delighted giggles brought Grace fully awake. "Hope you don't mind," Yates said, noticing her stirring. "She was fussing and you were sleeping so soundly I didn't want to wake you." Grace sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "No, it's fine. I'm just surprised she went to you. She's usually wary of strangers." "Animals and babies," Yates said with a half-smile. "They've always taken to me." He handed Anna back, and Grace was struck by how naturally he handled her daughter. "You have children?" she asked, settling Anna to nurse beneath a blanket for modesty. "No." Something shadowed his face briefly. "Never been that fortunate." Grace didn't press. Everyone in the West carried their private griefs. Yates served up bacon and biscuits left over from his previous day's cooking. As they ate, he outlined the journey to El Dorado. 4 days if the weather holds. We'll meet my men later today, 7 of them, all good sorts. They'll respect your space. And they won't mind having a woman and baby along. They work for me, Yates said simply. But more than that, they're decent men. Most have families of their own they're working to support. After breakfast, they packed up quickly. Yates helped Grace secure Anna in a sling across her chest before assisting her onto her horse. As they rode out, Grace found herself studying her unexpected protector. In the full light of day, she could see he was older than she'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, with streaks of silver at his temples. His face was tanned from years under the sun, with lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. "How long have you been driving cattle?" she asked as they crested a hill. "Own business since I was 25, he replied. "Worked for others since I was 14. Started as a wrangler, worked up to trail boss, saved every penny until I could buy my own herd. And now I've got a decent spread just outside El Dorado. Nothing fancy, but it's mine." Pride touched his voice. 4,000 acres, about 300 head of cattle, a dozen good horses. "You're successful then?" Yates shrugged. "I do all right. Enough that I'm not worried about tomorrow, which is more than most can say." He glanced at her. "What about you? Before all this, I mean." Grace looked down at Anna's head, visible above the sling. "I was a school teacher in Ohio before I married Thomas. He had gold fever, convinced me to come west with promises of fortune and a grand house." She sighed. "We never found either before the mine collapse took him." "I'm sorry. Don't be." "Thomas was." She hesitated. "He wasn't cruel, but he was restless, never satisfied. The life we had was never enough." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Around midday, they spotted the dust cloud that marked the location of Yates' cattle drive. "That's my boys," he said, pointing. "We'll approach slow so they can see it's me. They might be jumpy with strangers after what happened last month." "What happened?" "Rustlers tried to cut off part of the herd. We lost 3 good steers before we drove them off." As they drew closer to the herd, Grace could make out the forms of cowboys riding the perimeter, keeping the cattle bunched. One rider spotted them and raised his arm in greeting, then spurred his horse toward them. "That's Hank, my foreman," Yates explained. The man who approached was about Yates' age, with a weathered face partially hidden by a thick beard. He reined in his horse, eyes curious as they took in Grace and Anna. "Boss," he greeted Yates, tipping his hat to Grace. "Found yourself some company, I see." "Hank, this is Grace O'Malley and her daughter Anna," Yates said. "They're headed to El Dorado, going to be traveling with us." If Hank was surprised, he didn't show it. "Madam," he said politely, "you picked good company for the trail. Boss here runs the tightest outfit in 3 territories." "We'll camp early tonight," Yates told Hank. "That meadow we passed yesterday looked good, plenty of water and grazing." "Already sent Miguel ahead to set up," Hank replied. "He should have coffee going by the time we get there." They rode toward the main herd, and Grace was introduced to the other cowboys, a diverse group of men who treated her with a mix of curiosity and respectful distance. By sundown, they had reached the camping spot, a pretty meadow beside a clear stream. True to Hank's word, Miguel had a cook fire going and coffee brewing. That evening, sitting around the campfire after a hearty meal of beans, bacon, and sourdough biscuits, Grace felt an unexpected sense of peace. Anna was asleep in a makeshift cradle one of the cowboys, an older man named Doc, had fashioned from his bedroll. The men were sharing stories, their laughter low and comfortable in the gathering darkness. Yates sat beside her, close enough for conversation but maintaining a respectful distance. "You doing all right?" he asked quietly. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Your men have been kind. They're good fellows. Most have seen enough trouble in their lives to know not to judge others." Grace wrapped her arms around her knees, watching the flames. "I keep waiting." "For what?" "For the moment when this all goes wrong." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "The moment when I discover there's a price for your help after all." Yates was silent for so long she wondered if she'd offended him. Finally, he said, "There was a time I might have been that man, the kind who'd expect something in return. I won't claim I was always decent." He poked at the fire with a stick. "But I buried that version of myself years ago, along with a lot of other mistakes." Grace studied his profile, the honesty in his words touching something deep inside her. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean no apologies needed," he interrupted gently. "Caution keeps you alive out here. I respect that." The next morning brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds scudded across the sky, and a sharp wind cut through their layers of clothing. Yates consulted with Hank and decided to press on, hoping to reach a sheltered valley before the storm hit. They managed only a few hours' ride before the first fat raindrops began to fall. Anna, initially content in her sling, started to fuss as the rain soaked through her blankets. Grace pulled her cloak tighter around them both, but the wind drove the rain sideways, finding every gap in their protection. Yates rode up alongside her, concern etched on his face. "This is getting bad," he shouted over the rising wind. "Need to find shelter now." Hank pointed toward a line of trees in the distance. "There's an old trapper's cabin about half a mile that way. Used it last season. It ain't much, but it's got a roof." "You take the herd to that draw we passed," Yates ordered. "We'll meet up when the weather breaks." He turned to Grace. "Think you can make it to that cabin?" She nodded, already turning her horse in the direction Hank had indicated. Anna's cries were growing more urgent, and Grace could feel the baby's body trembling against hers. The ride to the cabin seemed endless. By the time they reached it, they were both soaked through, and Anna was wailing in distress. The cabin was barely more than a one-room shack with a sagging roof, but it was dry inside, and there was a small stone fireplace. Yates immediately set to work building a fire while Grace stripped Anna's wet clothes off and wrapped her in the only dry blanket they had, the one from Yates' saddlebags, which had been protected from the worst of the rain. "Need to get you both warm," Yates said, once the fire was crackling. "You've got to get out of those wet clothes." Grace hesitated, clutching Anna to her chest. "I'll step outside," he offered. "No," she said quickly. "It's pouring, just turn around." Yates nodded and faced the wall. Grace quickly changed into her spare dress, damp, but not soaked through, and wrapped herself in her cloak, which was wet on the outside but still offered some warmth. "You can turn around now." Yates had removed his dripping coat and hat, but was still in his wet shirt and trousers. He moved to hang their soaked outer garments near the fire, careful not to block the heat from reaching Grace and Anna. "You should change too," Grace said, noting how he shivered. "I'll dry out," he replied, but his teeth were chattering slightly. Grace fixed him with a stern look. You'll catch your death, and then where will Anna and I be? Change your clothes, Yates Forrester. I'll close my eyes. A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he reached for his saddlebags. Yes, madam. True to her word, Grace kept her eyes closed until he told her it was safe to open them. When she did, she found him in a relatively dry flannel shirt and trousers, stoking the fire higher. "How long do you think the storm will last?" she asked, rocking Anna, who had finally settled down. Yates glanced out the small, grimy window. "Hard to say. Could blow over by morning, or it might settle in for days." "Days?" Alarm edged Grace's voice. "We don't have supplies for days." "I've got jerky and coffee in my saddlebags," Yates assured her. "And if it comes to it, there's game in these woods. We won't starve." The storm didn't abate by morning. If anything, it intensified, with lightning cracking across the sky and thunder that shook the cabin's thin walls. Anna was fussy, unused to being confined in such a small space. Grace walked her back and forth across the cabin floor, singing softly to calm her. Yates watched them, something unreadable in his expression. "She has your eyes," he observed. Grace looked down at Anna's face. "Everyone says that, but she has her father's chin, stubborn, just like him." "What would you have done if we hadn't met?" he asked suddenly. "If you'd continued on alone?" Grace considered the question. "What I had to. Found work somewhere, saved enough to keep moving if necessary, done whatever it took to keep her safe." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "Not strong," Grace corrected. "Desperate, there's a difference." By afternoon, the rain had settled into a steady downpour, less violent but showing no signs of stopping. Yates ventured outside briefly to check on the horses, returning drenched but with a brace of rabbits he'd managed to snare near the tree line. "Hope you're not opposed to rabbit stew," he said, shaking water from his hat. Grace smiled. "Right now, rabbit stew sounds like the finest meal in creation." Together, they prepared the simple meal, working in the confined space with a growing ease. Grace found herself stealing glances at Yates when he wasn't looking, the capable hands skinning the rabbits, the thoughtful way he spoke to Anna as if she could understand every word, the quiet strength in his movements. When had she started to trust him? She couldn't pinpoint the moment, but somewhere between the cold ashes of her desperate campfire and this rain-lashed cabin, something had shifted inside her. That evening, after they'd eaten and Anna was asleep on a makeshift pallet, Grace and Yates sat side by side near the fire, the rain drumming on the roof above them. "Tell me about your ranch," Grace said, breaking the comfortable silence. "What's it like?" Yates' face softened. "It's on a rise overlooking a valley. The main house isn't fancy, 4 rooms, built it myself, but it's solid. Got a big porch that wraps around 2 sides. Best place to watch the sunset." Pride colored his voice. "The land's good. Sweet grass in the valley, a creek that runs year-round, timber on the north slope. Sounds lovely." "It is." He poked at the fire. "Lonely sometimes, though. No wife, family." The question was bold, but Grace found herself needing to know. Yates shook his head. "Was engaged once, back in '67. Catherine was her name. Fever took her a month before the wedding. I'm sorry." He shrugged, but Grace could see the old pain in the gesture. "Life goes on. Kept myself busy with the ranch. Figured that was enough. And now," his eyes met hers in the firelight, "now I'm not so sure." The moment stretched between them, weighted with possibilities neither was ready to name. "What about you?" he asked, changing the subject. "What will you do in El Dorado?" Grace looked away. "Find work. Save enough to maybe move on, somewhere Silas won't think to look." "You can't run forever, Grace." "I can try," she said with a touch of defiance. "For Anna's sake." Yates was quiet for a moment. "There might be another way." "What do you mean?" He seemed to choose his words carefully. "El Dorado's my town. People know me there, respect me." If word got around that you were under my protection, even Silas might think twice about causing trouble. Grace stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I. He hesitated. Because it's the right thing to do. She sensed there was more he wasn't saying but didn't press. The storm continued through the night, forcing them to spend another day in the cabin. They passed the time talking, sharing stories of their lives before they'd met. Grace told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, her years teaching school, the dreams she'd once had of opening her own academy for girls. You could still do that, Yates suggested. El Dorado's growing, plenty of families with children, no proper school yet. The idea took root in Grace's mind, a tentative hope she hadn't allowed herself in months. Perhaps, someday. On the morning of the third day, they awoke to silence. The storm had finally passed. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, painting warm patterns on the rough wooden floor where Anna played with a carved wooden horse Yates had fashioned for her. We should be able to catch up with the herd by nightfall, Yates said, standing at the doorway and surveying the muddy landscape. If they've kept moving, they'll be about 10 miles northeast. Grace nodded, trying to ignore the unexpected pang of regret that their time alone was ending. These 3 days had created a strange intimacy between them, forced by circumstance, but no less real for that. They packed up their few belongings and mounted their horses. Anna, secured once more in her sling against Grace's chest, babbled happily, reaching out toward Yates until he rode close enough for her to grasp his finger. "She's grown fond of you," Grace observed. "Feelings mutual," Yates replied with a gentle smile for the baby. His eyes lifted to Grace's. "For both of you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging how it shifted the ground beneath their feet. They rode in companionable silence for several hours, following the tracks left by the cattle drive. Around midday, they stopped by a stream to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of jerky and the last of the biscuits. "We should reach El Dorado by tomorrow afternoon," Yates said, watching Anna crawl on the grass beside the stream, delighting in her freedom after days of confinement. "What will happen then?" Grace asked, the question encompassing far more than just their journey's end. Yates studied her face. "That depends on you, Grace." Before she could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats made them both tense. Yates was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand as he scanned the horizon. "Get Anna," he said quietly. "Could be my boys, but I'm not taking chances." Grace scooped Anna up, heart racing as she moved to stand behind Yates. 4 riders appeared over the rise, and she felt Yates relax slightly as he recognized them. "It's Hank and some of the men," he said, lowering his rifle. "They must have doubled back looking for us." The riders approached, and Hank raised a hand in greeting. "Boss. Thought that storm might have washed you clean to California." "Takes more than a little rain to stop me," Yates replied with a grin. "Herd all right, fine and dandy. Got them bedded down about 5 miles ahead." Hank's expression turned serious. "But we got word from a passing rider. There's a man asking about a woman and baby in every town between here and Helena. Offering a reward." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. Yates must have sensed her fear because he stepped closer, his shoulder brushing hers in silent support. "What's this man look like?" Yates asked. "Tall fella, fancy dresser according to Miguel, who talked to the rider. Calls himself Silas O'Malley." Grace clutched Anna tighter. "He's found us." "No," Yates said firmly. "He's looking, that's all, and we're going to make sure he doesn't find you." He turned to Hank. "When we get to the herd, I want you to take the men and cattle on to El Dorado as planned. Follow the main road. Make sure you're seen." Hank's eyes narrowed with understanding. "And you, Mrs. O'Malley, Anna, and I will take the old mining trail through Butler's Pass." It's longer, but we'll avoid any main roads where this Silas might be asking questions. You sure that's wise, boss? That trail hasn't been used in years. It's our best option. Yates' tone made it clear the decision was final. We'll meet you in El Dorado in 4 days' time. After Hank and the others had ridden on to rejoin the herd, Grace turned to Yates. You're risking too much for us. If Silas finds out you've helped me. Let me worry about that, Yates said, helping her mount her horse. Right now, our priority is getting you and Anna safely to El Dorado. They rode hard for the rest of the day, reaching the cattle herd by sunset. The cowboys welcomed them with hot coffee and a hearty stew, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the camp. Word about the man looking for Grace and Anna had spread, and the men cast protective glances their way throughout the evening. Before dawn the next morning, Yates, Grace, and Anna slipped away from the main camp. Yates led them east, toward a range of low mountains that marked the beginning of Butler's Pass. The mining trail starts just beyond those foothills, he explained. It's rough going in places, but it'll keep us off the main roads. The path he chose was indeed challenging, a narrow trail that wound through dense pine forests and across rocky slopes. By midday, they were deep in the mountains, following a route that showed little sign of recent use. Fallen trees and rock slides occasionally blocked their path, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses around the obstacles. Despite the difficulties, Grace found a strange exhilaration in their journey. Here, high in the wilderness with Yates beside her and Anna secure against her chest, Silas seemed very far away. The world had narrowed to just the three of them, moving through a landscape of staggering beauty. They made camp that night in a small clearing beside a mountain stream. After settling Anna to sleep, Grace joined Yates by the fire, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this, for putting yourself at risk for us." Yates looked up, firelight dancing across his features. "You don't need to thank me, Grace." "Yes, I do." She took a deep breath. "No one has shown me such kindness since Thomas died. I'd forgotten what it felt like to not be alone." Something flickered in Yates' eyes, a warmth that made her breath catch. "You're not alone anymore." The simple statement hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to voice. "When we reach El Dorado," Grace said after a moment, "what happens then?" Yates stared into the flames. "That depends on what you want." "What I want." The concept seemed foreign after months of simply surviving. "Yes." His eyes met hers across the fire. "What do you want, Grace O'Malley?" The question stripped away her defenses, leaving her vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in a very long time. "I want safety for Anna. A place where we can build a life without looking over our shoulders. And for yourself," Grace hesitated, "I want." She struggled to find the words. "I want to stop being afraid, to feel like myself again, to maybe find." She trailed off. "Find what? Happiness?" The word was barely a whisper. Yates was silent for a long moment, then said softly, "I think I could help with that, if you'd let me." Grace looked up, meeting his gaze. The tenderness she saw there made her heart beat faster. "Yates, A cry from Anna interrupted whatever she might have said. Grace moved quickly to the baby's side, finding her feverish and distressed. "She's burning up," Grace said, panic rising in her throat. Yates was beside her instantly, his hand gentle on Anna's forehead. "How long has she been feeling poorly?" "She was fussy earlier, but I thought she was just tired from traveling." Grace rocked Anna, trying to soothe her increasingly agitated cries. "What if it's serious? We're miles from any doctor." "There's a settlement about half a day's ride from here, Pinetop," Yates said, already reaching for his saddlebags. "They might have a doctor or at least someone with medical knowledge." "Half a day?" Grace looked down at Anna's flushed face. "She needs help now." Yates pulled a small tin from his bag. "I've got some willow bark. My mother used to make a tea from it for fevers. It might help until we can get her proper care." Together, they prepared the tea, cooling it enough for Anna to take small sips from a spoon. The baby fought against the bitter taste, but eventually swallowed enough that Grace felt a measure of relief. Through the night, they took turns holding Anna, bathing her small body with cool water from the stream when her fever spiked. By morning, she was sleeping more peacefully, her temperature lower but still concerning. "We need to get her to Pine Top," Yates said, already packing up their camp. "Can you ride with her?" Grace nodded, exhaustion etched in the dark circles under her eyes. "As long as necessary." The ride to Pine Top was grueling. The trail grew steeper and more treacherous, forcing them to move at a painfully slow pace despite their urgency. Anna drifted between fitful sleep and miserable crying, each sound tearing at Grace's heart. Midway through the journey, a sudden storm blew in, drenching them in cold rain. Yates immediately stripped off his coat, draping it over Grace and Anna to shield them from the worst of the downpour. "We can't stop," he shouted over the wind. "Pine Top's just beyond that ridge." They pressed on, the horses struggling on the muddy trail. Grace held Anna close, praying as she hadn't since she was a child. Not just for Anna's recovery, but for the three of them to somehow emerge from this ordeal intact. Pine Top appeared suddenly through the rain, a small cluster of buildings nestled in a valley between towering pines. Relief flooded through Grace at the sight of civilization. The settlement was little more than a trading post, a saloon, and a handful of cabins, but to Grace, it might as well have been paradise. Yates led them directly to the largest building, which had a crude sign identifying it as Jenkins' General Store and Post. An elderly man looked up in surprise as they burst through the door, rain-soaked and desperate. "My God, what happened to you folks?" he asked, taking in their bedraggled appearance and the clearly ill child in Grace's arms. "The baby's sick," Yates explained quickly. "Is there a doctor in town?" The old man shook his head. "No doctor. Mrs. Jenkins has some medical knowledge, though. She's helped birth most of the babies around these parts." "Please," Grace said, her voice breaking. "My daughter's burning with fever." The storekeeper disappeared through a back door, returning moments later with a plump, gray-haired woman whose eyes immediately focused on Anna. "Bring her here," she said, gesturing to a room behind the store. "How long has she been ill?" "Since yesterday evening," Grace replied, following her. "We gave her willow bark tea, which seemed to help for a while." Mrs. Jenkins laid Anna on a small bed and examined her thoroughly, her weathered hands gentle but efficient. "Looks like a bad case of croup to me. Not uncommon in little ones, especially after being out in damp weather." "Will she be all right?" Grace asked, clutching Yates' arm unconsciously. "With proper care, yes. I'll make a steam tent for her that'll help ease her breathing. And I've got some syrup that'll bring that fever down." Mrs. Jenkins glanced between Grace and Yates. "You two look about dead on your feet yourselves. Jenkins will show you to our spare room. You can get dried off and rest while I tend to the little one." "I'm not leaving her," Grace insisted. Mrs. Jenkins fixed her with a kind but firm look. "You'll be no good to your daughter if you collapse from exhaustion, young lady. I've raised 6 children and helped care for countless others. Your baby is in good hands." Yates placed a reassuring hand on Grace's shoulder. "Mrs. Jenkins is right, Grace. We both need rest if we're going to be any use to Anna." Reluctantly, Grace allowed herself to be led to a small but clean room with 2 narrow beds. The storekeeper's wife brought them dry clothes, her husband's for Yates, and her daughter's for Grace, along with hot tea and bowls of hearty stew. "Eat, then sleep," she instructed. "I'll wake you if there's any change with the baby." The moment the door closed behind her, Grace's composure crumbled. The tears she'd been holding back for hours, perhaps months, came in a flood. Yates moved to her side, drawing her into his arms without hesitation. "She'll be all right," he murmured against her hair. "Anna's strong, just like her mother." Grace clung to him, her face pressed against his chest. "I can't lose her, Yates. She's all I have." "You won't lose her." His arms tightened around her. "And she's not all you have. Not anymore." Grace looked up, tears still streaming down her face. In Yates' eyes, she saw everything she'd been afraid to hope for: steadiness, warmth, and something deeper that made her heart race despite her exhaustion. "Yates," he shook his head gently. "Not now. You're exhausted and worried sick about Anna. Whatever needs saying between us can wait until she's better." Grace nodded, allowing him to guide her to one of the beds. She was asleep almost before her head touched the pillow, the emotional and physical toll of the past days finally overwhelming her. She woke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the sound of Anna's familiar babble. Sitting up quickly, Grace found Mrs. Jenkins in a rocking chair beside the bed, Anna in her arms looking pink-cheeked and alert. "There's Mama," Mrs. Jenkins cooed to the baby. "See, I told you she was just sleeping." Grace reached for her daughter, tears of relief springing to her eyes as Anna came willingly into her arms, showing none of the distress of the previous day. "Her fever broke early this morning," Mrs. Jenkins explained. "The steam treatments opened up her lungs nicely. She's been eating well, too." "Thank you," Grace said fervently. "I don't know how to repay you. No need for that. Looking after little ones is a joy, not a burden." The older woman smiled. "Your husband's downstairs having breakfast. Man was up half the night checking on both of you. Never seen a father so devoted." Grace opened her mouth to correct her, then stopped. There would be time for explanations later. For now, she simply wanted to enjoy Anna's recovery and the knowledge that Yates had been watching over them. Downstairs, she found Yates talking with Mr. Jenkins over coffee. He stood when he saw her, his face lighting up at the sight of Anna in her arms. "She looks 100 times better," he said, coming to greet them. His hand came up to touch Anna's cheek, and the baby grabbed his finger with a delighted gurgle. "Thanks to Mrs. Jenkins," Grace replied. "She worked a miracle." Over breakfast, Jenkins informed them that a man matching Silas's description had passed through Pinetop 3 days earlier, asking questions about a woman with a baby. "Told him I hadn't seen hide nor hair of anyone fitting that description," Jenkins said. "Didn't like the look of him, truth be told. Too slick by half." "Did he say where he was headed?" Yates asked. "Mentioned checking El Dorado next." Jenkins glanced at Grace. "Said something about family business." Grace's appetite vanished. "He's waiting for us." Yates' expression hardened. "Then we need a plan." They decided to remain in Pinetop for another day to ensure Anna was fully recovered before continuing their journey. Yates used the time to send a message to Hank via a passing freight wagon, instructing him to watch for Silas in El Dorado but to avoid any confrontation. That evening, after Anna was asleep in a cradle Mrs. Jenkins had provided, Grace and Yates sat on the small porch behind the store, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "What will we do when we reach El Dorado?" Grace asked. "Silas won't give up easily." Yates was quiet for a moment, then turned to face her. "I've been thinking about that. There's a way to solve this problem permanently, but I'm not sure how you'll feel about it." "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "If you were married, Silas would have no legal claim on you or Anna. As your husband, I could protect you both legally and otherwise." Grace stared at him, stunned. "Are you proposing marriage to me, Yates Forrester?" "I know it sounds sudden," he said quickly. "And I'm not suggesting we rush into anything you're not comfortable with." We could start with a marriage of convenience on paper only, until... He trailed off. Until what? His eyes met hers, vulnerability and hope clear in their depths. Until you might consider something more real, something based on feelings that I think we're both starting to have. Grace's heart pounded in her chest. Yates, I can't ask you to do this. Taking on another man's child, putting yourself between me and Sela's, it's too much. You didn't ask, he said gently. I'm offering, and as for Anna... His expression softened. She stopped being another man's child to me the moment I saw her sleeping by those cold ashes. She's just Anna, a little girl who deserves safety and love. He reached for Grace's hand. And so do you. Grace looked down at their joined hands, feeling as though she stood at a crossroads. Behind her lay months of fear and struggle. Ahead, an uncertain future that nonetheless held the promise of security, partnership, and perhaps even love. Yes, she said finally, raising her eyes to his. Yes, I'll marry you, Yates, not just for protection, but because I want to. Because in the short time I've known you, you've shown me more kindness and respect than I thought possible to find again. The smile that spread across Yates' face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Without a word, he leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened when she responded with unexpected certainty. When they parted, Grace found herself smiling despite the challenges that still lay ahead. What happens now? Now we ride to El Dorado, Yates said, his arm around her shoulders. We face Sela's together, and then we start building a life for us and for Anna. The journey to El Dorado took them another 2 days, following trails that kept them away from the main roads where Sela's might be watching. Anna, fully recovered from her illness, thrived under the attention of both Grace and Yates, her small face lighting up whenever either of them spoke to her. As they crested the final ridge overlooking El Dorado, Grace felt her breath catch. The town spread out below them in the valley, larger than she'd expected, with several streets of buildings, a church spire rising above the rooftops, and scattered ranches dotting the surrounding countryside. That's my place, Yates said, pointing to a ranch house nestled against the foothills about a mile from town. It's not fancy, but there's plenty of room for the 3 of us. Grace studied the distant house with its wrap-around porch and sturdy barn. Even from here, she could see it was well-maintained, a home built with care and pride. It looks perfect. They approached town cautiously, stopping first at a small church on the outskirts. The minister, a friend of Yates, agreed to marry them immediately when he understood their situation. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with Mrs. Jenkins, who had insisted on accompanying them to town, serving as witness and holding Anna. When Yates slipped a ring onto Grace's finger, his mother's ring, which he'd carried in his pocket for years and promised to love and protect her and Anna for all his days, Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. This hasty wedding, born of necessity but rooted in genuine affection, felt more right than her first marriage ever had. Afterwards, they rode directly to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Taylor was a grizzled veteran of the frontier who had known Yates for years. He listened gravely as they explained about Sela's. He's been in town 3 days, the sheriff confirmed. Staying at the hotel, asking questions all over. Says he's looking for his brother's widow and child, claims you stole family property when you ran off. His shrewd eyes assessed Grace. Course, now that you're Mrs. Forrester, that changes things considerably. I want a restraining order, Yates said firmly. Sela's O'Malley is to come nowhere near my wife or daughter, the sheriff nodded. I'll draw up the papers. And I'll have a word with Mr. O'Malley myself. Let him know the situation has changed. As they left the sheriff's office, Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she was no longer alone, no longer running. She had a husband, a home waiting for her, and the law on her side. They collected Yates' men and cattle, who had arrived in town the previous day, and rode together to the ranch. Hank and the cowboys had prepared for their arrival, cleaning the house and stocking the pantry with supplies. Their warm welcome for Grace and Anna touched her deeply. These rough men had become protective of her and the baby during their brief time together on the trail. That evening, after Anna was asleep in a proper crib that one of the ranch hands had built, Grace stood on the porch watching the sunset. Yates joined her, placing a gentle hand on the small of her back. "Are you all right?" he asked. "It's been quite a day." Grace leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Better than all right. For the first time since Thomas died, I feel like I can breathe again. Like the future holds something other than fear." Yates turned her to face him, his eyes serious in the fading light. "I meant what I said in those vows today, Grace. This may have started as a way to protect you and Anna, but my feelings are real. I want to build a life with you, a real marriage, a family." Grace reached up to touch his face, the stubble rough against her palm. "I want that too. I never expected to find you, Yates Forrester. Never imagined that the man who found us beside those cold ashes would become so important to me so quickly." His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "I think I started falling for you that very first night, watching you protect Anna with nothing but courage and determination. And I fell for you when you showed us kindness without expecting anything in return," Grace replied softly. "When you risked your safety for ours." Yates lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss filled with promise and tenderness that made Grace's heart soar. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Welcome home, Mrs. Forrester." The confrontation with Silas came sooner than expected. The next morning, as Grace was hanging laundry in the yard with Anna playing nearby, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. A well-dressed man on an expensive horse rode toward the house, his expression thunderous when he caught sight of her. "Grace," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "So this is where you've been hiding." Grace scooped Anna up protectively, backing toward the house. "Silas, the sheriff told you I'm married now. You have no claim on us." Silas dismounted, his face flushed with anger. "A convenient marriage, isn't it? Do you really think I'll let you get away with this? That child belongs to the O'Malley family." "That child," came Yates' voice from behind Grace, "is my daughter now, and Grace is my wife." He stepped forward, placing himself between Grace and Silas. "Sheriff Taylor issued a restraining order yesterday. You're trespassing on my property, O'Malley." Silas's hand moved toward his coat, but he froze when the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked echoed across the yard. Hank stood on the porch, weapon aimed steadily at Silas's chest. "I wouldn't," Hank advised calmly. "Boss here is the most respected man in the county." "You heard him. You won't make it to trial." Silas looked from Hank to Yates, then to Grace and Anna. For a moment, Grace thought he might press the issue, but something in the united front they presented must have given him pause. "This isn't over," he said, but the bluster had left his voice. "Yes, it is," Yates replied evenly. "You're going to get on your horse and ride out of El Dorado. You're going to forget about Grace and Anna. Because if you don't, I'll use every resource I have to make your life exceedingly difficult." His voice hardened. "And I have considerable resources, Mr. O'Malley." Silas hesitated, then spat on the ground before mounting his horse. "She's not worth the trouble anyway," he muttered, wheeling his horse around and galloping back toward town. Grace clutched Anna tightly, her legs suddenly weak with relief. Yates was at her side in an instant, his arm around her waist supporting her. "Is it really over?" she whispered. "It is," Yates assured her. "Silas is a bully and a coward. He won't risk crossing me or the law." He kissed her temple. You're safe now, both of you." In the days that followed, Grace and Yates settled into their new life together. What had begun as a marriage of convenience quickly deepened into something much more profound. Grace found herself falling more deeply in love with Yates each day, with his quiet strength, his gentle way with Anna, his unwavering support as she adjusted to life as a rancher's wife. For his part, Yates seemed to bloom under Grace's care, as though the loneliness he'd lived with for so long had been a weight now lifted. He brought flowers home from his rides, sat for hours listening to Grace read aloud in the evenings, and spent every possible moment with Anna, who had thoroughly captured his heart. Word came a week later that Silas had left the territory, heading east on the morning stage. The relief Grace felt was immeasurable, the final shadow over their new life together dispelled. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the stars emerge, Anna sleeping peacefully inside, Yates took Grace's hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "The town needs a school. Those children are growing up with no proper education." Grace looked at him in surprise. "Are you suggesting what I think you are?" "I've already spoken with some of the town leaders. They're willing to provide the building if we can find a teacher." His eyes met hers. Someone with experience, someone who once dreamed of opening a school for girls. Tears pricked at Grace's eyes. "You remembered." "I remember everything you've told me, Grace." His expression grew serious. "I want you to have your dreams, not just mine. If teaching is still what you want, it is," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. "But I want this too, our home, our family. I never thought I could have both." Yates smiled, drawing her close against his side. "With us, you can have everything." A year later, Grace stood in the doorway of their home, watching as Yates rode in from the range. Anna, now walking and talking, broke free from Grace's hold and ran toward him, her little legs pumping as she called, "Papa, Papa." Yates swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, scooping Anna up and spinning her around to her delighted giggles. When he looked up and saw Grace watching them, his face broke into the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "How are my girls?" he asked, carrying Anna with him as he approached the porch. "We're wonderful," Grace replied, her hand unconsciously moving to her slightly rounded belly. "All of us." Yates' eyes widened as he registered the meaning behind her words and the placement of her hand. "Grace, are you saying?" She nodded, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it this morning. We're having a baby." Yates set Anna down gently, then pulled Grace into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and joy words couldn't express. When they parted, both were laughing and crying at once. "A baby," he whispered, his hand joining hers over their growing child. "Our baby." "Our family," Grace corrected, including Anna in their embrace. As the sun set over their home, casting long golden shadows across the land that was now truly theirs, Grace thought back to that desperate night when her baby had slept beside cold ashes, and a cowboy had offered them the warmth of his fire. She could never have imagined then that his simple act of kindness would lead to this, a love that had saved them both. A family forged not just by necessity but by choice, and a future brighter than any she had dared to dream. In the gathering twilight, with Yates' arms around her and their children both present and future safe between them, Grace knew that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginnings, led exactly where they were meant to go.